Yep.
Great. So just overviewing the agenda, we've got a substantive kind of discussion component on some of the controversies around carbon markets as they pertain to peatlands, the COP28 debates, also some advocacy work we've been involved with in the Science-Based Targets initiative, and some of the policy work that's going on to think about how to tackle greenwashing. So we're going to have that. Then we've got a range of updates and some funding opportunities, and Diana's going to lead on that. And then finally, over to you all for your own updates. So that's the plan. Should we dive in, or do you want to say anything by way of introduction before we dive into that first segment, Diana?
I think we should jump in because I think it's great to have a little bit more response and interaction, and then everyone else as well that will be listening in on the call at a later date can also feel free to reach out to yourself or myself so that we can actually get some of these opportunities going. Thanks.
Fantastic. Okay, good. So if in the chat, it would be great if you can introduce yourselves so that for our notes, we have details of where you come from. So if you can add in, if you haven't got your whole name on screen, it would be good if you can tell us your full name and your affiliation, where you are coming in from, wherever that is. Welcome, Johan. Good to have you with us.
Yeah, I'm Monica. Okay.
Yay, no worries. So I think you'll be interested in this first segment in terms of the controversies around carbon markets, of course, Indonesia being the center of some of this stuff. So three components to this. So the first is just revisiting our last meeting and this desire that we have, I think, as a group of researchers to bring some evidence into these often very political and emotive debates around carbon offsets, in particular in relation to peatlands. And it involves just creating a more balanced debate. It's not to say that we as individuals, institutions, or as a group need to have any particular stance on this. We can be pro or anti-offsetting, but it's about trying to insert a bit more evidence into some of these debates. And so the suggestion was, could we actually organize some online events around this, and we've reached out to one of Britain's Royal Societies who's keen to host. The person in charge of that is ill at the moment, so that's on hold. But watch this space for some online debates, and the goal is to try and get some media coverage for that as a way in to the kind of the broader global debate on this. But pushing that aside for now, I thought it would be useful to actually get into some of this debate already, and look at two key issues. So first of all, we have been actively trying to achieve some policy change as a group with the Science-Based Targets initiative. It's one of a number of global initiatives. There are some others that do something similar, for example, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, that enable companies to set a net zero target in line with the Paris Agreement. And then gives them various checks and balances, which when they pass through with those checks and balances, they're able to then make a set of claims which are then credible, believable, backed up kind of claims around what they are doing to reduce emissions. And where relevant, to use offsetting in a responsible way. So they have a cap on the overall amount of offsets you're allowed to use. It's very low, 5%, if I remember right. And you have to be able to demonstrate that you have done everything possible to reduce emissions first. And you're only allowed then to offset your avoidable emissions, your unavoidable emissions. The challenge, however, is that they only allow people to use offsets based on carbon removals from the atmosphere, so sequestration in biomass, soils, etc. And peatland carbon markets are based primarily around avoided emissions, which they do not allow. And so the SBTi, as it's called in its acronym, is a major limitation around the scaling of peatland carbon markets internationally. Companies that subscribe to SBTi are not allowed to invest in peatland carbon. In addition to this, if you are a company, I don't know, you're doing dairy on peat bogs, etc., it's not taken into account. And so the two arms of our argument are that we want to persuade them to make companies explicitly take account of activities in their supply chains that are on peat bogs and the emissions associated with that. And we want them to allow carbon offsetting using peatland carbon markets. Under these very restrictive rules that they have. That's fine, that's good. It should be about reducing emissions first, absolutely, but it should also allow emission reductions from peatlands. So here is the letter that we've written. We attempted to bring together a range of organizations from industry, including some of SBTi's corporate clients. We got a number of targeted inputs from this group, and so we are effectively signatories to this as well. And there will be an opportunity, assuming we get a meeting with them, for members of this group to meet with SBTi and get involved in that advocacy work. Again, bringing science to bear on these questions as far as possible. So. This is the first arm of this kind of evidence-based approach to this debate. But I'm going to get into the more controversial issues next. So I wondered if there were any comments or thoughts on the challenges with SBTi and on the approach that we've made to them. Okay, so this is quite technical. Important because it is a major driver of companies avoiding investing in peatlands, which we need to tackle. So if we can crack this one, really important, but it is a quite technical argument we're making. So fingers crossed we make some progress. I'm going to move on to the more controversial issue and then open up for debate. So do come back with comments on our SBTi work. I think this is something that increasingly, if you are a peatland researcher and you're interested in their role in climate mitigation, then it is hard to escape the debates around carbon offsetting and the controversies on this. I think this is as much about enabling us to take a view on where we might stand on this. And the key issue, well, there are two key issues. One is greenwashing and the other is market integrity. I'm going to focus, if I may, on greenwashing in the ideas I want to present to you. The goal being to give you a sense of the problem, but also how difficult it is to solve. I think it's very easy to be an armchair critic and look at this and saying, well, we just need to stop companies investing in carbon markets if they are oil companies, for example, or if they have not done everything they can to reduce their emissions at source. But how do we actually do this? Well, here are some ideas that we've been working on in the UK. But this is based on international work, so internationally applicable, I think. So here's the UK context. We have a rapidly scaling peatland carbon market, but the information we are getting from the investment community is that that curve would be exponential if it were not for the SBTi decision around peatlands and scoping peatland carbon markets out of their work. We have some very ambitious targets. This is not just for peatlands, it's for forests, biodiversity, other kinds of markets as well. So £1 billion a year market by 2030. And what this goes to illustrate is just how much money is in theory available. My question is, how much of that goes to peatlands unless we tackle the issue with SBTi? So you've probably seen some of the coverage. Here was the first expose by the Guardian newspaper. I've talked to Johan about this and others who are familiar with the projects that they targeted, some of them in Indonesia. And different views on ultimately how big a problem this is. But Vera, as the world's largest seller of carbon offsets, this is a problem, and it's a problem that I think we all need to be aware of and take a view on. I think the issue with this is it is highly subjective. This particular article looks at the methodology that they're using for REDD+. So this is the idea of avoided deforestation. And then suggests there's another methodology available, and when you compare the two methodologies, you get different figures. Therefore, one must be wrong. And their conclusion is it must be Vera because they have a larger number. But when you look at it, there are arguments to say that either or both could be valid depending on the assumptions you make. And as researchers, of course, we know your methods affect your outcomes, and ultimately the expose told us more about the need to pay attention to your methods and to question both methods than it did to say that one was necessarily right or wrong. The most recent article has claimed that the vast majority of carbon offsets are, in quotes, junk. But I highlighted here, according to our criteria, and in one of those criteria is that unless your carbon offset project has a permanence period of 100 years or more, then it is junk. And that instantly means all of the carbon that is generated by the peatland code is classified as junk, because we set a 99-year maximum. But we did so on the basis of integrity, because how can we actually, hand on heart, say that we can guarantee something in 200 years' time? And so again comes this subjectivity, depending on what your view of permanence is and what is legitimate and defensible is your decision on whether or not this is junk. There are broader concerns. So Britain's Committee on Climate Change that advises all UK governments has also raised concerns, primarily around market integrity. And I think that there are some very valid concerns there, which I'll touch on at the end. But the big question that is in the media is this idea of greenwashing, that companies can get away with business as usual and offset their way into the green books. And I wanted just to illustrate the challenge of how we tackle this and to have a think about what we might actually be able to do in practice. So this is supposed to be our savior. This is the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative, and they have a claims code of practice. And so now companies can follow this claims code of practice and show that they have indeed done everything they can to reduce emissions at source and are only offsetting avoidable emissions with a clear plan to reach net zero. However, that's a voluntary international initiative. The question is, how on earth do you actually put that into practice on a national basis and enforce this? So in the UK, we've been trying to work out the kind of principles you would need in order to operationalize this. So who pays the costs of these tests? And the polluter pays principle would suggest that's the corporates. How do we verify this? Well, ideally, that should be third parties, more cost. How do we make sure it's proportionate? Well, it needs to be credible, but if this is so costly, then it could actually threaten the viability of the markets. Depending on those costs, it may then suddenly mean that only the large corporates can engage, excluding others. And ultimately, who polices this? And how do we ensure that there are penalties for non-compliance? Great, we've got a code, but actually, how do you implement this on a national basis? The first example of a carbon code that allows peatland carbon offsetting in the UK that has added in bio-integrity tests is something called Wider Carbon. And I've had a look at their integrity tests compared to VCMI, and they're close. but they are not anywhere near as stringent. So if we were to come in line with VCMI, these are going to be much harder tests to meet. And already Wilder Carbon are charging £60 per tonne of carbon. That compares to £25 per tonne average in the peatland code, and a much lower price on global carbon markets. Now, their higher prices is partly because they do these tests. It's also because they integrate biodiversity. I don't know to what extent that that price is simply because of those tests, but it's clear it will add cost. And the question is, how many people are lining up to pay £60 per tonne? I suspect not many. And an analysis by the market research company Trove of over 470 countries who are currently using carbon credits discovered that less than 4% would currently meet the minimum threshold. So this is a problem. People are not offsetting responsibly at the moment, and they will have to do much more, and it will cost them to do much more to demonstrate that they are using offsets responsibly. So coming towards the end then, how can we do this? How can we make this happen? Well, these are the questions we're trying to answer in the UK to try and operationalize this. What are the actual mechanisms? And I'll give you two examples that we're considering. Should these biointegrity tests be voluntary or mandatory? What are the pros and cons of each? For whom should they be mandatory if they are going to be mandatory? And who ultimately is going to be responsible for operationalizing, verifying, and then enforcing all of this? So essentially, there are two approaches. We can go mandatory or voluntary, and mandatory means legislation. So lots of different options here, but an amendment to the Companies Act would be one thing we could do in the UK. In your country, you'll have your own versions of this, but the key thing is that legislation has a means of enforcement. The great thing about this is, great, we have now created an absolutely watertight solution to this. Greenwashing is not allowed by law in Britain for the largest companies. That's the companies that are covered by the Companies Act, who have to make these mandatory disclosures around their emissions. And the result, of course, then is that we're excluding the smaller companies and NGOs. And as a result, you significantly reduce the volume of transactions in the market. So maybe, but we have problems, which means, well, actually, maybe a voluntary approach isn't that bad an idea. And so we're exploring the role that standard setting organizations like the British Standards Institute, so ISO would be an international similar organization, where then you have to get, say, the peatland code. All of your markets would then have to accredit to BSI. Well, they wouldn't have to, it's voluntary, but we would expect them to, because that's going to drive markets to those particular codes. And then if you're a BSI accredited market, then you'd only be able to work with companies that have got that VCMI or some other kind of relevant accreditation. So that's one way that we can do this, with a few ways of enforcing this. And the good thing now is it's not just for the big companies. Now this is anyone who wants to buy carbon through the peatland code. If the peatland code is accredited to BSI, then we, to get that accreditation, have to check that our buyers are VCMI accredited. So great, anyone who wants to invest through us now, yeah, they have to meet those checks. But at the same time, the worry is that if that's too expensive for people to do, we've already covered the issue there, then perhaps those companies decide, well, maybe we go with a low integrity competitor. And we have a growing number of low integrity competitors to the UK's peatland code now. And perhaps this actually has an unintended consequence of driving activity to low integrity codes. So hopefully you can see, yeah, there are solutions. None of them are ideal. This is incredibly challenging, and we need to, I think, be engaging with these debates. A final thought is, I said there are two issues. One is greenwashing. The other is the integrity of the market. So checking that markets actually are additional, permanent, they're avoiding leakage, things like that. And this is what this program overall is trying to achieve. And I think that this is a really interesting model that we could look at in other countries as well. where now all of your markets in a particular country can accredit to a standard, which is a minimum quality threshold that says if you've got this BSI stamp of approval, then you have high quality, additionality, permanence, all the rest of it. This is a code, a scheme you can trust. So this idea of standards for standards as a way of raising standards and having some kind of mechanism, some kind of leverage over the market to make sure that, that this is reliable, accurate, verifiable stuff that's actually happening on the ground. So thoughts, reflections in the chat or raise hands. And instantly we've got something from Mark. Thank you. This would presumably be very problematic in Indonesia, where ecosystem restoration concessions are only awarded for 60-year periods. Like I said, it's a subjective thing. How long is long enough? And is 60 years long enough? We have a minimum permanence period of 30 years in the peatland code, an average length of 88. Is any of that enough? It depends on your perspective. Owen, over to you.
Thanks, and thanks for the presentation, Mark. Look, I apologize because I haven't been able to attend the last couple of GPI meetings, so I may be coming in, I'm just coming in on the basis of your presentation rather than any context that may have been offered in last meeting. No, I mean, it sounds a fascinating problematic, and I very much buy into the relevance and priority for engaging with those tricky issues rather than, you know, avoiding them and staying with purists or something, because that's really important. So I buy into it. Can I just ask, I mean, presumably there are similar debates going on in Canada and in a couple of other developed countries with, you know, large peatlands. Could you comment on those? I mean, are they in the same dilemmas, or are they moving in one direction rather than the other? I'm talking not only about the officialdom, but talking about activists and, you know, people trying to influence policy in those countries.
Yeah, so I'll let others with better knowledge than me speak to those countries, but I think what we're seeing as a positive result of the Guardian's campaign is a move towards prioritizing decarbonisation first, and that's often then insetting in supply chains rather than offsetting as a default. And I think that is the right movement of direction. Right movement of travel, sorry. The offsets it should only ever be a small proportion of what's happening in the net zero space, and for unavoidable emissions only. So I think that's good. That will constrain carbon offset markets, but that's appropriate. The key thing is that the peatlands get a slice of that pie for that limited and rightly limited pie. Just put a link, a note in the chat to Mohammed. I'm not sure, you've said you haven't finished reading it yet, but Indonesia has just issued some regulation. So it'll be really fascinating to get a chance to read that. Any initial impressions from what you've read, Mohammed?
Yeah, I'm actually I've just found it today, so I haven't got time to read it through. I just found it just before the meeting, so I just basically yeah, I think they try to they try to regulate, for example, for any organization that will involved in this matter should be registered to the Financial Service Authority. That's one. And yeah, I will send you the link. So sorry, I haven't got I just found it just before the meeting. I will just I just send the link first, I think.
But I think the point that both Owen and Mohammed are making, that I've been making as well, is that this is a problem for all countries. Each country has to set their own legislative and regulatory environment. And the fact that we have VCMI and international initiatives like this does not solve the problem. It helps, but we need national guidance. And as researchers, I think we need to be trying to engage in those debates nationally. Diana.
Thanks so much. And I just wanted to speak from like the policies perspective. I've had the pleasure of being in two regional climate week events, which were really talking about the issue of, you know, what is fair and sustainable and appropriate carbon pricing and carbon market. And one of the things that also does come back around is that for peatlands, you know, the countries in the tropics and Indonesia has been sharing this openly in their interventions, that they would really like to see an upgrading and updating of the emissions factors. You know, as all of the market trades and everything is going to be revolving around what is the result, like what is the appropriate you know, calculation. So I think that that's something that we're seeing as well. You'll see it in some of the other sessions that are coming at the COP, and I think that this is an ongoing discussion that'll be happening for the next year or so, because countries have asked the UNEP and the Global Peatlands Initiative to actually create a task force that is going to try to set a carbon, not a carbon, but a peatland specific target for both protection, but also for restoration. And in order for us as a community to do that, we need to have the science and these upgrades and updates and a better indication of what emissions factors look like around the different parts of the world, for the, especially for the tropical band on peatlands, which are definitely seeing prices much lower than anywhere else in the world. Thanks.
Yeah, interesting. So I'm just making a note of that, but it'd be good to get any more information you can give us about that task force. Diana, thanks. Maria, coming in from Canada, I believe that you may have some answers and context for what's happening in the Canadian context. So yeah, please.
That's
thanks.
what, yeah, I just thought since Owen picked on Canada, like not picked on, but said like who can speak to Canada, I could jump in. And I think like this is something that we're going to struggle with, but maybe from a different perspective, because we don't really have the area. Well, we do have area that needs restored, right? But we are largely thinking about conservation, and that kind of I think is maybe more ripe for greenwashing, right? So saying that like I'm going to get the carbon credits to conserve these sites that probably would have been conserved, like, you know, we really have to like have strong policy around that really proves additionality and really thinks about leakage if we want to use those offsets. So I think there's groups here that are working on trying to develop a Vera protocol that would allow for peatland conservation, but whether that's, you know, those are the questions that sort of have been pushed back onto them, is like, how are you going to really tackle those to make sure that these are real reductions in emissions and not just kind of greenwashing by counting a peatland that would have sat there and continued to store that carbon regardless, which isn't really going to get us further ahead from a climate action perspective.
Yeah, so we can create a Vera, an equivalent of UK peatland codes. Great, we can create a market, but how do you regulate that and ensure that the right people are buying from that market, and that is accurate, verifiable, etc. Yeah, it would be really nice if you could put me in touch with the relevant people, just or if you can just give me a little bit more of a summary of that for the notes, so we can share more widely what's going on there, because I'm aware of that market development piece, but it would be nice to get a little bit more detail on that if possible.
I can put the company that's working on that right now, Mark, in the chat for you.
Yeah, that would be great. Yes, wonderful. Thank you, and thanks, Mohammed, as well, for that link as well. Good. So the final thing I was just going to mention, and I'll hand over to Diana, is in the Paris Agreement, there's something called Article 6, and that's where all of the offsetting and other kind of aspects of carbon trading sit, among other things. And intriguingly, there's a debate ongoing at the moment about whether or not emission reduction units should be allowed. Now, the original text of Article 6 talks about reductions and removals, which sounds kind of pretty clear to me that reductions and removals are allowed in these markets. But various people have come back and said there's ambiguity in this. We want to know what you mean by reductions. And actually, the goal, as it seems, is they're trying to get reductions removed. So it's only removals would count. And if that were the case, then that would spell a much larger kind of disaster for people in carbon markets. My own reading of this as a non-expert who is not at COP is that it's fairly unlikely. The tenor of the debate is all about how do we get more money from global north to global south, and carbon markets are one key mechanism for doing that. And there's a lot of talk about how to get them operating and get increased prices and increased volumes. And so the general kind of debate seems to be towards supporting and boosting carbon markets rather than cutting out an entire swathe of markets by removing emission reduction projects. I think the problem we've got is that the controversy has all been around RED+, which is about avoided emissions. And that's ultimately the same space that peatlands sit in. So I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on the COP28 Article 6 debates about some more informed alternative perspectives on the threat and the likelihood of that threat. Okay, great. Thanks, Maria. Owen, over to you.
Yes, it doesn't relate to that. I certainly don't have any further insights on the COP debates, but it was just about how to follow up for those who are particularly being UK based in terms of where to access some of these debates. You've summarized them neatly, and obviously I can see you're an entry point on this, Mark, but in terms of next steps on the research that's required, or the applied research or whatever, in terms of moving forward on your agenda, how do you see it? Who's doing it? I mean, obviously this is quite highly institutionalized with people wanting to create markets. So it's really a question of, is there value, where's potential value added for people in this working group? What that they could provide? No.
Yeah. So I think the issue is that there is nobody else globally making the argument for peatland carbon markets and what needs to happen. Diana and the GPI team have their finger on the button in terms of those who are doing things. So maybe speak about some of the climate kick work, for example. But yeah, there are various things going on in kind of different corners of the world, and GPI is the only kind of body that is trying to actually see what's happening across the board and potentially coordinate things, as we have done with that SBTi meet. So loads of people have said again and again, SBTi is a problem, we need to do something about it. But as GPI, in collaboration with IUCN, we coordinated that, and we have made we've started taking action. So engaging with this group, I would suggest, is the best way to that kind of information and how you can help. Johan.
Yeah, okay, Mark. Thank you. I think this is actually quite an important point, and comes at a critical point of time, because particularly here in Indonesia, things are moving quite quickly, partly because of the new regulations around what's called project-based carbon, with RED and actually RED and peat in Indonesia are often, in terms of spatial scope, often very similar. But another thing which is moving now here as well is jurisdictional level, forest and land use programs, which include, amongst others, which to a large extent in some provinces up to 70% are actually made out of peat emissions. And this is one thing actually we now are working actively here in country. But one of the possible markets is then to a voluntary carbon type of private sector associations, and from that perspective, the SBTi, the issue raised was actually, I think, it's quite opportune as well. And also, it is in terms of ambition, I think without those peat emissions, it's very difficult, for example, for Indonesia to meet these NDC ambitions, ambitious as the current national budgetary resources are way insufficient.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that support. And do let us know if you'd like to get involved in the call to SBTi, assuming we can get that. Great. And Eric, and then we'll move on if that's okay. So Eric, one final comment. Thanks.
Yes, thanks for the great presentation. I just have a comment about Article 6, that that's true. We have a standard for peatlands that is like a general standard, mostly based on tropical peatlands. Yeah, and we have methodologies, of course, but there are no methodologies for like mountain peatlands. No, that and even when we go into Article 6. We speak about avoided emissions or from anthropic degradation, avoided deforestation, and so on. But when we go to the highland peatlands from the highlands, the drivers are not necessarily direct anthropic. So it's not about deforestation or land degradation. It's many times it's the glacier melting or something like that. So there are no methodologies for that. I just want to remark this point that we are speaking globally about peatlands, but we have this kind of a special peatlands that we can focus on. That's my point. Thanks.
I was not aware.
Actually, I'll speak to that. Yeah, maybe I'll speak to that. Actually, there are many of the peatlands in the world, not just the mountain peatlands, that are not accounted for at all, or there's no sort of emissions or approaches that are available, including, you know, in Africa. So it's definitely something that's a gap, and I think that, you know, the work that is happening through the work of the peatlands mapping and through the global peatlands assessment is, you know, these are the steps that we're trying to take as a community to really show the gaps, so show the deficiencies, show also the opportunity, and to rally some support. Yeah. Thanks.
Interesting.
You want to just close it off?
Yeah, let's do that. And then maybe Eric, others, as a point to follow up. Is there an action to think about how carbon markets could be developed to exploit that opportunity that you've identified? So yeah, I'll maybe make a note and follow up directly with those interested. So yeah, let's move on. Diana, if you want to take the floor now.
Thanks so much. So we have, after the launch of the Global Peatlands Assessment at the last COP27, we've been really trying to see how we can actually get more and more recognition of the work that's been done by launching chapters on a regional basis. So I had the honor to be at the RE3 conference together with Maria, actually, in Canada in June, and we relaunched the North America chapter with the coordinating lead authors. Recently, Francisca and the team, the coordinating lead authors from the European chapter, had a webinar and relaunched the Europe chapter. And we're having a session actually at the COP of led by Ifo Suspense, who's one of the coordinating lead authors from Africa, to do a little event on trying to get attention to the Africa chapter and also highlighting some of the issues that are missing, you know, that we're speaking about here now. So definitely next year there'll be this relaunching, and we want to do it many times. We want to record them so we can get this out around the world, and also encourage the other researchers, whether you're a contributing author or a coordinating lead author, to also have sessions relevant in your communities. So, but we do want to do this on a more systematic basis. So just watch out for that. And if you want to get involved or you want to be part of it, please do let us know how you'd like to be involved or how you can host or coordinate some of those sessions. Then I'm going to share, oh, Eric, go ahead. I see your.
Yes, I have a comment on that. So it's nice that you have a kind of regional working groups or something like that. But I come back to the mountains. I come back to the mountains. So we are interested to work even from FAO in the development of a map, if it's possible, using the global peatlands assessment to quantify the quantity of peatlands that exist at some altitude and to characterize them and measure. Maybe we can work also with other universities and researchers. And
we actually
also
have that, those maps in the Global Peatlands Assessment. So we can talk about that. I think that FAO, I mean, I'm working with the global team FAO. We're already working on the mountain peatlands work, and we'll bring you into that. But definitely there is already the information there. We have a glimpse of what, examples of where further mapping has been done. And it's definitely something that is going to be a topic as well for early next year. So I want to just like dive into the research piece. So I think that we could have another call, Eric, Johan, myself, on the mountain peatlands programmatic stuff that we're already working on. But I wanted to really try to get the researchers to be able to be involved and their voices be heard in the launches of the regional assessments, because it is those researchers where the decision makers need to be able to reach out, know who they are, and also to help them to actually advance research in the country or even sort of sub-regional and regionally. Johan, did you have something else, or is it also?
No,
on the
I think
I
agree with that, and particularly what you were saying, to getting national resources in, and also to voice, particularly because particularly in terms of mountain peatlands, and thinking Southeast Asia, the awareness of the existence of policymaker on mountain peat is very low, while the extent actually is quite significant. And you talk about in Indonesia, but also Myanmar. Yeah, Myanmar now these days is of course a bit difficult place, and Myanmar, North Vietnam, and also So
we're actually planning.
There's still I think there's a lot to do, and also and as you were saying, quite on Diana, need to profile.
Yeah, actually, we have a number of resources that were developed alongside the Global Peatlands Assessment. So we have a specific mountain peatlands, a policy brief that we're going to be pushing out. So that it's there, all the information's there, and we'll work across the group to actually make that a major highlight next year. And we also have been working with ICI to advocate, and you may have seen already that the ICI thematic call is out, and it's indeed on mountain peatlands. So we'll be working on a proposal across the group on that. So let me just jump to the COP events, because the COP28 events where peatlands are highlighted here. We have a number, we have the global stock take of peatlands, which is exactly talking about what's missing to count peatlands properly. We have as well an event at the COP presidency, with the COP presidency, and a group that's really trying to bring attention to food and peatlands, the impact, and also the opportunity of paludiculture. We also have, I mentioned this Global Peatlands Assessment, zoom in onto the Africa chapter at the Congo Basin Pavilion. And we also have an event that's going to be happening together with the International Tropical Peatland Center and the UNCCD G20 Land Initiative on enabling the triple win for tropical peatlands. And that will really dive into the calculations. What's missing? Where do we have it? Where do we have better knowledge on the ground that's maybe not being applied? So these are some of the events that are here, as well as some other events, one in the German pavilion, which I will also share as a follow-up, as well as in the Ukrainian pavilion, both on peatlands. So I will share that also in the Slack channel. And then I wanted to take this opportunity, because we don't have much time, but just to shout out and say that the Bayfor team that spoke to us, like I think it was more than a year ago, and then middle of the year, they did as well this deep dive into what's the opportunity for peatlands in the EU Horizon calls. And there's peatlands related calls once again. We saw that actually, I feel that our working group had a great impact because there are 5 EU Horizon awarded calls that are related to peatlands specifically, even if they might be under more of a wetlands lens, but definitely we got these amazing funding for from the EU Horizons for ongoing peatlands related work, which I think everyone can benefit from that joining up. And I just wanted to share some of the highlights from this Excellence Lab that shared opportunities. There is, and I'll put it again in the chat, and we'll share it again on the Slack channel. If you haven't joined up the Slack channel, please do. But one of the first opportunities is the EU-Africa Union cooperation on agroforestry management for climate change, adaptation and mitigation. There is 18 million euros for 3 projects. Deadline to apply is February. And 3 independent partners must be from Africa, but some can be from the same geographic region. So there are some limitations, but of course, we do think that there could be an opportunity for a polyculture-oriented project, maybe in some of those places where we do see already degraded peatlands, like in Uganda or some along the Nile Basin, or even in South Africa. So we'll share this across. I have more information in a actual document which summarizes everything very well, but I just don't want to take too much time of the call. But then there are other opportunities, indeed, this EU-Africa Union opportunity for climate neutral, social just, fair trade food systems. And this is also an opportunity that we could see for related to food systems, but also, you know, avoidance of these large scale commodities or food related products, and then maybe going back toward more traditional or more indigenous food sources on wet peatlands and wetlands. So trying to really also create this emerging market, local market, that would be appropriate. I will share the document with Mark, and he will hopefully share it as a Google Doc, either on the Slack channel or otherwise. But I think what we were talking about here is, as the last time we had the Horizon calls, people sort of put their hand up and said, hey, we're interested. And then we created a working group, or people offered to lead some of those calls, and then they reached out across this research group, working group, but also then tapped into other relevant researchers. So following this call, because it is coming up in February, I think that we maybe need to see how we could facilitate it, or if there's no need for facilitation, is there someone that's already working on such a call or interested in working in such a call? So if not anyone in the room, then I think we could put it on the Slack channel. When I do share that, please do share it widely, because I think the community at large could benefit from it. We saw indeed a result of the last engagement, 5 EU Horizon calls awarded on wetlands and peatlands, and linked, heavily linked to this research working group.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll leave it here.
Yeah, so just as add in the chat, if you would like to be part of this, we'll get the full details sent around via Slack and email, I think, so that you can consider this properly. But the goal is that we'll then anyone who kind of votes in, we'll then put those people together and decide if we need to facilitate, or if you can self-facilitate. We'll see what happens. So do just let us know. Eric, did you have another question, or was that from earlier? No. Okay, great. Good. So we're on to our last two agenda items. We always struggle for time, but we have the chat, luckily. So it would be great if you can share any new, not just projects this time, but new papers, other kinds of outputs you have on the peatlands, and just to get a bit of knowledge exchange going in the group. And if any of you want to speak to your latest outputs, then do feel free. We've got another 5 minutes, so we can get a bit of discussion going. But the key thing is knowledge exchange at this point. So new projects or papers on peatlands. Over to you. Martina.
Hi. I don't have anything to report on a new project. Unfortunately, the 60 billion euro hole in the German budget is not doing us any favors on new projects at the moment. But some co-workers of mine just finished a big project on polluted cultures last year, and they developed guidelines for establishment of then polluted cultures. So I'll just share a link to that document in the chat.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mark. Great. Eurydice, we have, I made a fairly small contribution, a Spanish language paper, which I'm just putting in the chat. If you want to say anything about that, or give a translation of the title at least. Oh, there we are. The title is in there here as well. Here, I'll put that. Eurydice, did you want to say something?
Yes, sir. I'm on an office, so I need to leave to be able to speak. Sorry. Yes, this is about knowledge exchange. I have my fellowship is already in its last year. So I have
Eurydice, I'm really sorry, but I think you're breaking up. I can see from other people's body language. Yeah, it's not just me.
Working with some stakeholders in Peru. Okay. You can know. Oh, sorry.
Came back.
Yeah, facility, my connection is not that great where I am. Can you hear me?
We can now, yeah. You want to try again briefly and
You
see?
could also maybe just turn your video off and we could hear your voice instead.
Good idea.
Yes, possibly.
I just did it to try to reduce it.
Yeah, is that okay? Or
yes.
Still very, my signal I think is very low. Now we're just saying that through my fellowship and the project that we have been collaborating with you, Mark. So my fellowship is just in the last year, and I have been able to work quite closely with the Peruvian government to develop this NDC for peatlands, and not just me, but other organizations as well got involved. And there is a nice experience there that we could bring it to other results in any other group. Can you still hear me or no?
Mainly.
It is a bit sketchy. Yeah.
Don't worry. I can possibly
I can
to
add
you, Mark,
to it.
and
yeah.
We got the gist
and then
of
you can share it. Yes, Mark. Sorry. I may not really. My signal is not good here. Sorry.
Let me just add on to that, maybe, Mark, because indeed UNEP was involved in supporting that work for Peru to include lowland peatlands in the NDC, and they've also asked us to support them in doing an adaptation, a mountains adaptation NDC as well. So we hope to be starting that work in January back with Peru, and we definitely tap in across this group, but also across the Global Peatlands Initiative Partnership. I see, Ryan, you have your hand up. Sorry about that.
Oh, Ryan, not Castle. Sorry, I've got your name around the wrong way. Ryan, over to you.
No problem. Like, it's two first names, I guess. Cahill is my first name. Ryan is my surname, so either work. I'm new to the group anyway. It's my first one here, but I said I'd just talk a bit about what I'm doing. It's more regionally based in Ireland, and we're looking at how carbon accumulation rates change in long term with climate, and paleoclimate changes throughout the Holocene, depending on what scale we're looking at. But yeah, I'm interested in working with any sort of groups that are looking at, because we always look at, instead of latitudinal based changes, we're looking at altitudinal, from lowland lying Atlantic blanket bogs to mountainous bogs in Ireland, mostly all on batrophic blanket bogs, but how that has been affected by, in the past, long-term climate effects. Because in Ireland, it's a debate on peat and whether how we actually define peat, because some groups might say peat is this amount of carbon content, and you might need this depth of peat to be considered as peat, and how this may affect changes in the long term, especially we're looking at the climate aspect of it. And as peat is not worldwide with one definition, really, there's and there's so many different thresholds within it. What can we look at a national scale for it? So yeah.
Andreas is resonating with the challenge of how do you define peat bogs? So many options, as we did in the Global Peatlands Assessment.
And I'm laughing, otherwise I'll start to cry again.
We need to bring up any bad memories, so hopefully no one cries.
We're making baby steps.
Yeah,
that's great. Very interesting work. Sorry.
Do send us a link if you can.
Yeah, I will. I'll put a link into our page. It's just started this September now, so if there's any sort of projects where that I might be I could come in any way useful, I'm happy to, look into it. I'll put my email and my link into the chat.
Wonderful, thank you. I think that's us up for time, so I'll leave Diana to close. But thank you, everyone. It's been great.
Yes, thanks so much. And please do try to pop in and watch those live streams. It's like, especially these, the stock take is also going to be a piece that's going to be, raising the issues that we just had here, as well as the triple win. So if you haven't seen it, have a look at those events. We created some UNEP web pages for them, so they're easy to find. But if the live stream has not been uploaded into the website, you can also just reach out to me and I'll share it with you. And if you haven't, I also share all these updates on Twitter and LinkedIn. If you're there, please do share. So, hey, it's been a really incredible year for peatlands, and I think it's just next year going to be even more incredible, honestly, because the Global Peatlands Initiative is hoping to get additional funding. This year we've been in a bit of a drought on funds, but we hope to get a new insurgence of funding and get the broader team back on board to help to facilitate and advance these topics. And we're just hearing more and more from countries, and also from scientists, and also from policymakers and practitioners, that there is this, important coordination piece. And we're honored to be able to do that. And also, what an absolute pleasure it's been to work with Mark again this year. And I just hope that more and more individuals will be able to join this research working group, but also take it off into your other section. If you're a policy expert, or if you're a peatlands mapping expert, please do join up. We know that some other groups are also bubbling up for topics like finance, also private sector. How do we elevate and motivate and create the confidence in the private sector to actually look to peatlands, with all the uncertainty that's around. And indeed, we have our Global Peatlands Initiative website, which will be updated and upgraded as we bring back part of the team. And we'll start to also create this space where the research publications can be uploaded. So do share your research publications through this group, through Slack, or also directly to me through my email. If you don't have it, I'll put it in the chat. But I just wanted to round off the year and just say, keep well, please. The end of the year is not here, right? We still have we still have a lot ahead of us, and please do, if you have a social media presence or if you have some influence, share out these peatlands events as far and wide and diverse as you can, because we need to get more diverse sectors, disciplines on board so that we can crack the peatlands opportunity. Thanks, everyone, and please do reach out and keep in touch. And our next meeting is Thursday, 21st of March. It'll be 3 p.m. UK time so that we can try to get everyone from around the world to join. And we know you incredible people in the Asia Pacific zone are late night people. So I really love that you stay up late and always contribute. Thanks so much for getting up early, for staying up late, and also just being present and participating.
Yes.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks
Stay
to
well.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Electra.
Thank you all.
Great. Thank you. It's been great working with you.